One of the special things that a Hall of Fame does is to create a fellowship of recipients who can speak to the impact of receiving such an honor. And tonight, we have with us our first SBS Hall of Fame recipient, Adam Rogers, who is here from Geneva, Switzerland, along with his wife, Jillian. And in Geneva, Adam has duties with the United Nations. Adam is the Assistant Director, Regional Representative for Europe, and Coordinator, World Alliance of Cities Against Poverty, United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. I would like for Bob Poirier to please come forward. He's a professor in politics and international affairs. He's also a very close friend of Adam's. And he's going to introduce Adam, who will then share his experience as a Hall of Fame recipient and then tell us about today, because today is a very special day. It's United Nations Day. So Bob, if you would. Put yourself on the cord there.
Good evening, everybody. I am very proud to introduce Adam. I've been in higher education now for 46 years, 38 of them here at NAU. You can see what it's done to me. It's really worn me out. But in that 46-year period of time in my career, I can honestly say that I've never had a student that I've been more proud of than Adam. And I can honestly say I've never had a student that has inspired me more than Adam. When he graduated from high school at age 18, he spent 5 years essentially hitchhiking around the world. And he came to NAU as a freshman, age 23. He was obviously older than his peers and certainly wiser than his peers. He had been to 60 countries. I've been to 50. I was looking up to him, a college freshman. He's been to 60 countries. I've only been to 50. What am I doing wrong? He was amazing as a student because he had insights from the world that he traveled. I teach international affairs, and he had insights from the world he traveled that no other student in the classroom could possibly contribute. It wasn't their fault, of course. They did not have his experience. And while at NAU, there was no question that Adam was Mr. International. I don't think there was a single foreign student on this campus when he was a student here that he didn't know. He knew everybody. Adam's the kind of guy that makes friends very easily. He's very outgoing, etc. And he was Mr. International. He was involved with the Lumberjack. I think you wrote the editorials, if I recall correctly. And I always told him, I said, one day, Adam, I know you are going to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. I was convinced of that. But even though I do realize that it's almost impossible for a North American to have that post, but if anybody can do it, it will be Adam. He still has probably another 20 years left in his career. So if anybody can do it, it will be him. And yes, this is United Nations Day, and it's very appropriate that we have Adam here for this event on this day. Adam did, of course, go into the United Nations. So I was partly correct in my predictions, and he worked his way up, and now he is a very senior official in the United Nations. And but when he graduated from college, 2 years after he was in college, he was already being Mr. International before he went to the United Nations. He went down to Rio for the Earth Summit in 1992, which was then and still is the largest gathering of heads of state in the world in one place at one time. And he was there to cover that. And he wrote a book about it, which I have quoted a few times in my own publications. And from there, he managed to get into the United Nations, and the rest is all history, as they say. So I am very pleased and very honored to present to you Adam Rogers, who is now no longer my student. I could learn a lot from him, but is my friend. So, Adam?
Bob's not only my friend, but one of my favorite people. Thanks for that introduction. Wow, don't have a lot of time. Made a few notes here. I'll try to fill in a few holes. And I may do something tonight. I may speak about something which I've never done in a public forum. I speak, I'm now based in Geneva. I speak at universities and to local and national governments all across Europe. Actually, all around the world. I'm often, this last year, everywhere from Medellin to Yerevan. But I'll speak, well, I'll get to that, but I'll talk about the high school thing, which my aunt and uncle there will attest, and they're part of that story. But you know, on our journeys through life, nearly everyone and every experience in some way shapes us in some way, if we're awake. It could be a taxi driver, it could be you know, a homeless person, it could be a head of state, it could be anybody, somebody in an elevator. When we're awake, almost every person contributes in some way towards shaping our consciousness, our personalities, our characters. You know, who we are today is in large measure due to many of the people that we've encountered. And some impact us in ways that actually change the direction of our lives. And often we only become aware of that in retrospect. NAU and the Lumberjack, I think, at very pivotal times in my life, really changed the direction and helped me become who I am today. I mean, in ways which I'll explain in brief. I mean, over the past 50 years, I just turned 50 last November, I celebrated on 5 continents, parties in Nairobi, Bangkok, Phoenix, right? Geneva, and Medellin, Colombia. I had to do that on 5 continents. And I had a nice graphic design as a communicator and all that, so I was in, local friends organized each party for me. I'm really good at digressing, so I'll try to stay focused here. So over the past 50 years, I've had the good fortune, that's why I have to take some notes, right? Because I could easily go off on tangents, I have too many stories and anecdotes in my head. But over the past 50 years, I've had the good fortune to explore and live in well over 100 countries, about 130 or 140 now. And I've met and connected with thousands of people who have influenced me in many different ways. Amazing people from all walks of life, from celebrities like Kenny Loggins, John Denver, and Lenny Kravitz, to politicians like Fidel Castro, Jimmy Carter, and Mikhail Gorbachev. From homeless on the streets of Calcutta to billionaires on the streets of Manhattan. From soldiers in the deserts of Syria to mendicants, Tibetan monks in the mountains of the Himalaya. But back to NAU and the Lumberjack and high school. I mean, to say I was a rebel, a roughneck, a troublemaker with no respect for education would be an understatement. I mean, I tried grade 9 3 times. I didn't make it. So I dropped out, became a prospector, a gold, up in the Yukon. I grew up in the Yukon Territory in northern Canada. I was born in Arizona, at Williams Air Force Base. Lived in Tucson for about 10 years. And then my parents packed up and moved to the Yukon. I mean, not even the capital, Whitehorse, which is a bustling metropolitan area with 15,000 people. But the Yukon, if you can imagine, is twice the size of California with 25,000 people. I ended up there when I was 11 in September. Winter falls around mid-September. By December, it's 60 below. So that was kind of the environment I was in. Most people, it's one school from kindergarten to grade 12. You have usually 10 kids going into kindergarten, and you may have one person graduating from high school. So you usually lose 9 along the way because of the mining and the exploration and all that. There's so much money. And, you know, it was a rough life. So I had explored 16. I left home at 15, had an apartment, right? I paid for it with my roommates the next month's rent with the beer bottle returns from the previous month. We used to take the beer bottles in, cash them in, and pay the next month's rent. So my Uncle Chuck, who's from Flagstaff, my deep roots here. My grandfather, Charles Dryden, was the senator of Coconino County, and my grandmother was here, and so I had roots. My uncle said, why don't you come down and try high school again? So I thought, okay, that sounds good. It was really an excuse to get on my motorcycle. I had a Honda 750, and to drive from the Yukon down to Arizona. So I did that. The CB 750F, bolted a big plastic lobster onto the front fender to be different, you know, to be a rebel. So I showed up in Flagstaff, long hair, bandana, you know, no helmet laws. And my uncle enrolled me. I became a senior at F.H. Collins. And so I sat in classes for about 6 months, and it was okay, but then I quit. So I thought, no, this isn't for me. And I challenged the GED. Now this is where NAU starts to come in. I passed the GED, and NAU had a program where they allowed me in, right, on probation. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I came in and I attended some classes, philosophy, liberal arts, you know, psychology. I moonlighted at Yavapai College and got certified as an EMT. I thought that'd be adventurous, you know, racing around in ambulances and all that. And so I got my EMT certification, and I dropped out of NAU. So I've kind of like inspired my family. Oh, he's coming back in. Oh, I'm losing hope. And all right, he's back in. Oh, so now I jumped back on my motorcycle, drove up to the Yukon, got a job as a medic. And I saved up just enough money. Everybody, wow, now he's a professional. He's a medic. You know, he's a serious guy. So after about 6 months of doing that, I quit. I put everything I owned in a backpack, and I hitchhiked to New York and bought a one-way ticket to Senegal. I had a vision to go around the world. Everybody said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go east. And when I left the Yukon, they said, east? Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg. And I said, no, I'm going to keep going east until I end up in the west. I'm not really sure about this round earth thing. I'm going to make sure, see if it's round. If I come around the other side, then I can attest that, I always had to prove things for myself. So 5 years, 50 countries, and so that's when what Bob talked about. When I came back, it was 82 the first year I started. I came back 87 after the 5 year. Ended up back in Alaska, back to the Yukon. My mother had moved to, my sisters to Edmonton, and fortunately left a forwarding address. And so I went down to Edmonton. My motorcycle I had then had broken down and was seized up. I sold it for parts, bought another motorcycle, and drove down to Flagstaff, lived with my grandmother, scheduled my classes, Tuesday and Thursday classes to go skiing, and my other classes to go back up the hill where my grandmother lived and watch Days of Our Lives with her. She was my roommate. We looked after each other. I'll tell you, one of the best roommates really the best. I really miss my grandmother. So that was the second sort of influence back into NAU. I enrolled in international affairs. Why? Well, because I traveled around the world, it was probably the easiest thing I could do to get that piece of paper. But, sorry, Bob, but once I started attending the classes and met Bob Poirier and other professors, Stephen, right, I got excited about it. I started delving deeper interest. I started putting the pieces together, connecting the dots, getting a bigger picture. And at one point, I picked up The Lumberjack. And I thought, well, I might try writing, just to try to, so I proposed an article. There were floods in Bangladesh. I said, well, let's take the floods in Bangladesh and localize them so that the American students, Arizona students, can relate to them more, give it the NAU angle. So I did that. I wrote one article, and then Chris Fiskus was the editor, and he said, why don't you turn this into a column? We'll call it NAU Global View. Oh, okay, that sounds good. And to further give me more incentive, they said, well, we'll cover your tuition. And so I got a scholarship, and I was writing 2 stories a week, and that is what influenced the rest of my life, to tell you the truth. I mean, that really, the degree, the bachelor's degree, and then later my Master of Arts. I went to U of A, not University of Arizona, but University of Alberta. And then I got my MBA at London School of Economics just in 2008. And now, sort of overachiever, I can admit I dropped out of high school, although I probably wouldn't talk about it too much amongst my colleagues at the UN. But my MBA was just actually last week we found out in the Financial Times it became #1 out of 100 MBAs in the world. So I'm kind of proud of that. But I'm mostly proud of NAU. The Lumberjack, when I graduated, I immediately got a job in Malibu. Well, one of the summers, I took the summer off and traveled overland to Guatemala to study Spanish. And I met a guy there who was involved with the College of Sustainable Agriculture. And when I graduated from here, he happened to be on the board of a financial services firm, which had a house based in Malibu, California. And he wanted me to continue helping him in Guatemala, so he got me a job at this. I knew nothing really finance. I had my job in I had my BA in political science and international affairs, experience on the Lumberjack. Next thing I knew, I was a financial advisor, acting as a fiduciary on behalf of these companies, going to the IRS and negotiating, renegotiating their debt and their IRS payments and all this. During that time, I was rollerblading on the beach in Venice. I'm digressing too much. Anyway, I met Lenny Kravitz. I met Lisa Bonet on the beach, her aunt. And they were passing out this little newsletter called Earth News. And I said, this should be a magazine. And I became friends with them. I contributed a couple of articles, again, like I did with the Lumberjack. I knew how to write, knew how to string sentences together, knew how to find the story. And then I sort of forgot about it. I went off to work on a film. And I got a call from, actually, I didn't even know who Lenny Kravitz was, to tell you the truth. But I liked Lisa's aunt, right? So she calls me up and says, look, we're going to start a magazine. Lenny agreed to put a bunch of money into it. And we need you to interview Lenny tomorrow. So I went off to interview Lenny, and I stopped at a record store to get a cassette with music. I said, anybody heard of Lenny Kravitz? I'm going to meet him this afternoon. And so I heard his music, I interviewed him, and we created this magazine, Earth News. This is all to say that things that just learning how to write and communicate and articulate concepts, learning how to listen and be able to reinterpret to specific target audiences through their individual paradigms in the language that they understand. And English is one language, but within English we have different, constituents and different. There's different languages within English. You could say to speak in somebody's language means listening, connecting, understanding, getting their trust, and then you can, start that loop of communicating and listening and sharing information and influencing each other's lives in large measure. So that's about Secretary General. Very unlikely as as an American citizen, I kept my US citizenship. It's one of the P5, of course, around the Security Council, and none of them can become Secretary General. Although it is now what we call the Western Europe and Others group. And so probably one of my former bosses, I worked with Helen Clark a lot. She's in the running. Sigrid Kaag from Holland, she's in the running. It's going to be a woman next time. And so Michelle Bachelet is, no, not Michelle, she's in Chile. I know her quite well too. There's the, trying to think of the other person that's the head of UNESCO, Irina Bukova. One of those three women will be the Secretary General, the next one. So, and it's about time. We need a woman up there. And I could talk about that for the next hour if you like to. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Happy birthday to the UN, 69.
Yeah, there you go. Well, thank you so much, Adam. That was a wonderful story.